Greetings, fellow conquerors. This is darkfireslide, and I was going to make a video about Ming when I woke up today, and instead I'm only sort of making a video about Ming today. And the reason for this is because I found out that the next expansion for EU4, though to be fair, it's not a full expansion as they're calling it, and we'll discuss that. Third Realm is coming out on June 14th. I woke up this morning and I found that out. Now, to put things into perspective, Mandate of Heaven was released on April 6th, and so basically what we have is that Paradox has released a $20 DLC about a month ago, and I guess it would be almost 2 months ago now, to be fair, and they're already releasing another pack of downloadable content, basically. So I'm going to kind of talk about this because I think it's something that's kind of happening to EU4, and I think it's something we should talk about because something that's kind of interesting about Paradox, in my opinion, and this is a dangerous thing to say considering my whole channel is basically based around EU4, but I think that the game is kind of running into trouble, I guess. And this is completely off the cuff, by the way. I'm just going to speak my thoughts about this. I'm not reading from like a script or anything, but I will still try to keep it concise for your listening pleasure, as it were. So anyway, what's going on with EU4? So EU4 released in 2013. So the game's been out for about 4 years now, and this is fine. You know, the game is getting old, and you know it happens to every game that it gets old. Now, fortunately for EU4, it has a very, very active developer studio, and they are constantly releasing updates and things to keep the game alive and moving and smooth, at least in theory. So back when I first started playing and Art of War hadn't even come out yet, you know, I realized, like, okay, this game's good, but there's a couple of flaws with it. Then Art of War came out, and Art of War was basically just this incredible expansion because it basically added nothing but, like, mechanical changes. It didn't really add any fluff to the game, pretty much just, like, added in a bunch of features that everybody wanted, things like upgrading ships, the ability to transfer provinces in war. It added in the Religious League war, tons of other features. And it added in a bunch of, like, I was just astounded back then by how many free features came out with the game, too. I was like, wow, like, how can a company release this many free features all the time? Like, this is amazing. And I was basically in love at first sight with Paradox when I got Art of War, and when I was playing, that was when I really started to sink my teeth into EU4, and that was about 2 years ago now, maybe 2.5, and yeah, you know, I still am in love with EU4. It is still my most played game on Steam, even like discounting the fact that I have like a YouTube channel. It is my most played game, and for good reason. It's a great game. It's, you know, it does so many things right, and it is such a great grand strategy game, and it was my introduction to the genre, and it is still this fantastic game. And then Common Sense came out, and the free update that came with Common Sense that added in development instead of just like base tax for provinces, and this was, you know, this completely changed the game because it was like, oh, now you can actually like sort of play tall. It wasn't very good back then, but you could do it. It was now an option. You could actually have things like a strong Britain that was just inside Britain, or a strong Netherlands that was just inside the Netherlands, and economic ideas would actually like allow you to do this. So Common Sense was very, very good, and at the time I'm like, what else does this game need? Like, at that point when Common Sense came out, I'm like, this game is complete. Like, I don't feel like I need anything else to play this game. And then we kind of got like into the fluff, I guess. And at first it was really, really good fluff. So at first, like, after Common Sense came out, we have El Dorado, or El Dorito as I like to call it, and this is a non-essential but good non-essential DLC. And the reason that I say this is because it adds in a very, very cool optional feature, and that is the ability to create custom nations. Now, this led to some hilarious exploits, like somebody changing the Ottomans to I think DDR Jake called them food, and used this to do a Byzantine playthrough because it didn't affect achievements at the time. And that was really funny, and the whole idea of custom nations was really cool, especially because you could randomize the entire world so that, you know, if you ever got tired of the same old thing in Europe or in the world, you could roll a random world and then just play the game, and that is so cool. That is such a big like feature for replayability purposes. And like they did a poll like a year ago, and basically custom nations were the most played nation in the game, more than anything on the poll on the forums. And like so it goes to show like this was an optional feature, but it was really popular and really good, a really well thought out mechanical thing. And then we have the Cossacks. Those of you who have followed my channel for a while know that I do not see the Cossacks very fondly. I see the Cossacks as problematic, to use a hot button word. The reason personally that I don't like the Cossacks is because I don't like the diplomatic feedback system, and the reason for this is because it makes diplomacy into a number. It makes it into another resource, and in a grand strategy game, while that kind of makes sense, I also it didn't really resonate with me, I guess. And the reason that I didn't like diplomatic feedback so much is because it basically screwed over small nations, because the art of getting a larger ally who hated someone that you hated or wanted to expand into in order to fight an offensive war took much longer, and so small starts got like unnecessarily difficult compared to how difficult they already were. Like, it was already difficult before Cossacks to get a like alliance with the big nation and then do things. Now, people are going to debate with me with this in the comments, and that's fine. If you think I'm wrong about that point, like, I know, I can already see it, that there are people who are going to say, like, you know, well, that made the game really easy that you could just ally a big person. But it really, when you think about it, it really wasn't that easy to ally big people. A lot of the time you had to improve relations long enough to get a royal marriage, and even then, sometimes big nations would have just like a -80 to ally you, just because you were so tiny. Like, you had 3,000 troops, or like, we have absolutely no interest in allying you. Like nations like France and sometimes the Ottomans, actually, if you're like a Muslim nation. So it could be like extremely difficult to get alliances as like especially as like a one province minor, even before the Cossacks. But now it was virtually impossible, and even once you got that alliance, it was only a defensive thing. And that's the thing, right? It's like, to me, like, an alliance is like an agreement between parties, and I know that like historically this didn't really happen all that often, but as a game mechanic, I think it's wonderful that you're able to play the diplomatic field, as it were. Honestly, the diplomacy and the relatively intelligent AI. Now I know everyone in EU4 will say, they're like, oh, well, the AI is brain dead. Well, to be honest, compared to other strategy games of a similar style, or a similar theme, like Total War, for example, or Civilization, EU4's AI compared to them is actually quite good, and this is based on my own experience with those series. And so the Cossacks for me, and I'm not even talking about estates, let's talk about estates too. So estates, really, they're like the cool part of the Cossacks for me, but they're not enough to make me want to deal with the diplomatic feedback system. So, but it's funny because it kind of brings up an issue that I started to see in terms of like feature creep that started to happen with EU4. So when I'm talking about estates, we have to look at what it does, what its purpose is, and what it adds to the game. So a lot of the time, especially like in my last, or my first Let's Play actually, I was rolling generals with military points, and pretty much every time I rolled generals with military points, I would get people saying like, why didn't you just use your aristocracy to roll a 60 tradition general instead? And I thought about it, and I'm like, why should I be able to roll a 60 tradition general without 60 Army Tradition, just because I'm using this, like, mechanic. It like, why even have Army Tradition at all if I can just use this mandatory, or, like, this, unnecessary system to, like, basically give myself a free better general. And I don't think... I really disagreed with that system, and honestly, most other people disagreed with that system as well. The Cossacks is one of the lowest rated DLC, right after Mare Nostrum, of course. And honestly, I understand why, and I for that reason have not purchased the Cossacks, and I don't want to play with the Cossacks. I have no interest in it because it adds in buttons like that, and it adds in the diplomatic feedback system that I've just discussed that I don't particularly care for. And now let's talk about Mare Nostrum. Mare Nostrum is possibly the worst DLC in EU4, especially of the newer DLC. And this is evidenced by the Steam review scores, of course. I think for a while it ran... I think it still is running below 50% on the Storm page in terms of, like, reviews of approval or disapproval. And it's not... It's a bad DLC. It doesn't really add much to the game. And I know this because I can't even remember half of the things that it added to the game. Although I do remember that with the update... that sailors were added to the game, and that was part of the free update. Is this idea of, like, a national pool of sailors? And as far as I understand it, the thing is, when Mare Nostrum was being announced, and this is especially, like, frustrating to me, Paradox basically led us to believe that Mare Nostrum was going to be this big fix to naval combat. It was going to be this big fix to everything involving boats. I mean, you know, heck, the name Mare Nostrum is our sea in Latin. And when it came out, it just, like, had almost nothing to do with the Navy. The only feature, like, paid feature I remember from Mare Nostrum is the ability to form trade leagues between republics, and then also limiting merchant republics to 20 provinces, which is something that they would later remove. And so they made this completely ineffectual, worthless DLC, and they were still charging $20 for it, right? Like, every single one of these DLCs has been charging $20 for it. So already between these 4 DLCs, we're already at $80. And as somebody who doesn't make a lot of money myself, and probably other people can relate to this as well, you know, not making a lot of money and not having $80 to spend on a game. Granted, these DLCs came out in a matter of, you know, the space of like 2 years or so. I can understand why you wouldn't want to pay for DLC like this. And to be honest, why even if you did pay for this DLC, you would probably turn it off after you got it. Some people treat EU4 as, like, they treat EU4 as the only canon is if you play with all the DLC on it, and I wholeheartedly disagree with this. I don't think you need every DLC to play EU4 and enjoy it. I think you need Art of War, and, you know, thinking back to Art of War, it's kind of terrible that Paradox made the ability to flip provinces, like transfer provinces in a war, a DLC feature that you have to pay extra money to get the ability to do this very, very basic function. I think it's, you know, and not to be defamatory or anything, but like it's kind of criminal doing that. I mean, it's a great business tactic. Like, hey, you want to do this, like, very, very important mechanic that will totally change the face of war? Here's the ability to transfer provinces, and the AI will do it too. You're welcome. And then, but pay us $20 for it. But getting back on track here, let's talk about Rights of Man. So Rights of Man was a step in the right direction, funnily enough. And Rights of Man is genuinely a great DLC. If I had to recommend 3 DLC to people, in order of importance, I would say Art of War, Common Sense, and then Rights of Man. Rights of Man is a great DLC that adds in tons of, like, new mechanical stuff for every nation, and that's what makes it so great when you think about it, is that it is a shift in game mechanical, like, changes that really impacts the game in a way that is not a form of like feature creep. Like having ruler traits from Rights of Man is really, really cool, and it's fun because it's reminiscent of Crusader Kings 2, which is a game about having ruler traits and all these different traits that like affect your country by giving you more taxes or giving you less taxes or lowering unrest or raising unrest, but giving you more options. So even if you have a bad trait that affects your national like a national modifier, you can still get good options out of it, out of some of the events that fire. And so it was just a really well thought out DLC, and adding the ability to end regency, or having the ability to have queen regencies so that you can still declare war, is also just like a great idea. And so Rights of Man was really, really worth it, and it was really, really good, and we were all excited for it. And then they announced Mandate of Heaven, and they're like, hey, we're going to change Ming. And on paper, this is a great idea. Like, yes, change Ming. It's really, really weird how they have a 50% autonomy floor, but still have, like, you know, they have this massive empire, but the only way to get out of it is to westernize. But the other thing I didn't talk about with Rights of Man is the institution system that kind of changed the face of technology. And honestly, I feel like the institution system is a step in the right direction. As complicated and as, like, obtuse as it is at times, I think it is a good, like, net change to the, like, net positive for the game when it comes to, like, quality. It allows nations outside of Europe to compete so long as you have a good player at the helm, which is good. I think that's good. I think we should encourage good player skill actually mattering, and, you know, one way is to keep up with institutions by, you know, developing your provinces. I think that's really cool. Of course, that being said, if you don't have common sense, or there was like one other DLC that allows you to develop your provinces, institutions are terrible, and you can only play inside Europe, and even then you can't really affect it all that much, so, you know, have fun with that. Anyway, so Mandate of Heaven gets announced, and we're kind of excited for it as a community, and we're like, hey, they're going to change Ming. That's cool, we're excited. And then they changed Bing. So Ming lost all the autonomy, but they kept all the development. So Ming literally doubled in size and effectiveness over the course of a night, and this means that we have a nation that starts out making like 33 ducats a month in profit while maintaining like a 70,000 man army with a force limit of like 100 at the start of the game, with 1100 development, and so many provinces that they can't even make them all into states at the start of the game, which is absurd. Now, to kind of curb this, they added in a new feature with the Mandate of Heaven, as it were, with the emperorship of Asia, basically. I'm not going to say China because it also affects like other countries outside of directly China. And it also added in things like, you know, banner infantry, banner cavalry for the hordes. And would you ever? So Paradox basically tried to sell corruption to us on a silver platter, right? They're like, hey, so you don't have to spend money on things anymore. Instead, you can make your country more corrupt to take out loans, and you can make your country more corrupt to now get these units from like for like Manchu tribes. And it's a cool idea on paper, but you often have people ending up with like tons of corruption because it costs so much corruption to get these troops. And like, yeah, they raise the morale of the army that they're in, but you know, you're still talking about like a Manchu trying to take on a ridiculously powerful Ming. And the problem is, losing the Mandate of Heaven doesn't really, like, it's terrible. Like 50% more damage received on both like phases of combat, and minus 50% goods produced is pretty terrible. But Ming is still just obscenely, absurdly powerful. Like when you compare a 1,000 development nation to a 500 development nation, there's just so much more that the 1,000 development nation is able to do by comparison. It's more than twice as good, is the problem. And you know, it sucks because now Ming is this dominant force in Asia always, and I've seen screenshots on the forums and a thread entitled "Ming is too OP," where a Ming defeats Russia, basically, in like the 1700s. And for those of you who are being historical about it, like, that should not be a problem. And this is kind of a side note, right? Like, I get tired of people using the historical accuracy argument for literally everything. So anytime there's a problem with the game, they're like, well, it's historically accurate. Or whenever there's a good game mechanic that doesn't agree with history, they're like, well, we should make the game mechanic worse because of historical accuracy. Like, at the end of the day, this is my opinion, EU4 is a game, and good game mechanics should trump historical accuracy. And I know that that's like a heinous thing to say, because I love history. I love having history in games. But games need to be balanced around game mechanics, not on history. Now, that being said, I'm not advocating that, like, every nation in EU4 have, like, 50 developments starting out and, like, you know, go from there. Like, no. The asymmetry in the game, or, you know, where big nations have easier starts, is fine. But the problem with Ming is it's too strong, right? Like, it is a dominant force throughout the game, and that never changes, basically. Like the AI will never ever defeat Ming China, is the problem. Whereas all the time in, like, normal games, there are games where France gets defeated. There are games where Spain gets annihilated. There are games where Austria gets destroyed. There are games where Poland and Lithuania gets carved up. There are even rare games where the Ottomans get chewed up and spit out. Like, it happens. And when it does happen, you're like, whoa, that's, like, so crazy. But that is never going to happen with Ming China. And the reason for this is because, A, they're super powerful, and B, the Tributary System, which I haven't even talked about yet. So, to kind of encourage Ming to not just hyper-expand everywhere, as you might with literally any other nation, they instead give you the Tributary System, which allows you to get free points from everyone, or free money from every person around you, who you then treat like a vassal, defend against non-tributaries, etc., etc. And through this you get additional bonuses through the mandate system, including things that improve the mandate. So you get mandate to improve the mandate, and improve your provinces, and make you even scarier and bigger than you already are. And on top of this, all the points that you're getting, all the monarch points that you're getting through the tributary system, if you're a player and you're Ming, you can use those to just improve your own provinces, continue to grow, and embrace institutions at a very, very rapid rate. And that's pretty silly, right? Like, that's pretty crazy that, like, Ming is just this, you know, like, blob of indestructible, infinite monarch points that can continue to develop its own provinces if it feels like it. And anytime someone doesn't want to listen to you, you can just send in your cajillion troops and like, delete them, basically. And it's not, the reason it's not fair and it's not balanced, in my opinion, is because there's no coalition threat, right? Like, at no point, if Ming does something out of line, are all of the tributaries going to be like, you know what, together we can beat Ming. And if there was a mechanic like that, then I'd be all for it. I would think that was super cool, that you could, like, rally all the tributaries against Ming, and if you got enough people and enough liberty desire, you could all declare independence from Ming at the same time, and just have this awesome epic war. Like, that would just be so cool. But instead, it's basically usually left up to the player as to whether or not you can even defeat Ming in the first place. And so now that we've talked about the history of the EU4's DLC policy, let's get into another point. So, EU4 has about, I don't know at this point, like, literally hundreds of dollars, probably about $300 worth of DLC at this point, for a $40 game. And to be honest, it's kind of ridiculous. And even if you get it in a sale, you're still going to be spending probably $50 to $60 on this game just to get some of the game mechanics that a lot of us at this point deem essential. And that sucks, right? Because I think one of the worst things about a game is, like, a caveat. Like, one thing I always think of is the port of the original Dark Souls to PC. It's like, well, Dark Souls is great, but you have to download this mod that actually lets you play it. Or XCOM Enemy Unknown. Whoa, XCOM's great, but you're probably going to want to download Long War. Same with XCOM 2, actually, which is a whole other subject that I'd want to get into. But and games like that, where it's like, yeah, the game's great, but you have to download all these things first, like, to fix it, basically. It's like, it seems like we're entering an era where games don't come that great out of the box. Now, that being said, EU4 is a great game out of the box. However, it is made, you know, we're talking about a jump from, like, a 7.5 out of 10, right, like, on a review, to, like, a 9 out of 10 with some of the DLC. I'd even give this game like a 10, honestly. This is honestly, like, in my opinion, having played a lot of the other Paradox Grand Strategy games, EU4 is, in my opinion, the best in the entire, like, catalog, hands down. Like, just on a game mechanic level, it is, like, just the best. It allows the most freedom and flexibility of any of the games without sacrificing anything, and that's great. Like, it's still, like, this. It's a deep game from start to finish, and you can do whatever you want with it. It's awesome. But anyway, the point I'm getting into is with the next DLC that's coming out. And now, admittedly, Paradox isn't calling it an expansion. They're calling it an immersion pack. And it's going to be $10, and, like, that's fine. That's cool. But it's coming out 2 months after a DLC came out that they basically never really bothered to address. They just kind of, they made Mandate of Heaven, said, here, have this, now we're going to make Russia DLC. And that's very unlike them. Like, in the past, like, if there was an issue, they would try to fix it. But now, basically since Mare Nostrum, or the Cossacks, like, whenever there's an issue in the game, the Paradox doesn't really seem to want to try to change it anymore. And that's disheartening, because there's a problem with Ming right now. Like, it's genuinely making the game worse to play, and honestly, in the future, I'm probably going to end up turning off Mandate of Heaven. And, like, you know, at this point, like, Paradox already has my money, so, like, who cares, right? But at the same time, I'm just frustrated because I feel like the studio is changing. I feel like we're going down this path of, like, DLC matters more than player, like, value and stuff like that. And this is coming out at the same time. You know, the DLC, the expansion, not the expansion, the immersion pack, is being released alongside a Hearts of Iron DLC called Death or Dishonor, and you can buy them in a bundle. And I don't know if this was, like, rushed to, like, encourage that, or if this was just a happy coincidence and they're like, hey, have a few dollars off by buying these together. And I think that some of the things I've said here are controversial, right? Like, I think that, like, aiming criticism at Paradox is a very difficult thing to do because they're an amazing company. And I'm not just saying that because I run a YouTube channel where basically my success is predicated on how much of their content I make. So that being said, really what I want out of Paradox at this point, and this is kind of the whole point of the video, and if you skip this far, like, good for you. The only thing I want really from Paradox is to just rebalance and fix the DLC, right? Like, I want them to go back to the old style of, hey, we're gonna actually, like, take our time with what we've created instead of just releasing this half-baked thing and then saying, well, hey, here you go, and then moving on to something else. And I maintain my final point. The thing is, like, I may not buy EU4 DLC anymore. Like the whole, like, oh, we're expanding Russia and adding in these new game mechanics is cool, but it's symptomatic of feature creep, and I don't like that we've already paid so much for DLC. And now, on the one hand, I will say this in defense of everything that I've just said. It is okay to release this much DLC for a game. What is not okay is putting in these DLC things that make the game, like, playable, basically. So honestly, while Art of War is one of the best DLC, it is also, ironically, one of the most, like, heinous DLC. It's one of those DLCs that's like, you need it to play, and that's scummy because I shouldn't need a DLC to enjoy a game. But anyway, I've gone on for about 30 minutes now, and I hope I've raised a point, kind of how I feel about Paradox, kind of showing this evolution over time of what's been happening to the game and why I'm kind of frustrated with it right now. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. And if you did, you know, be sure to leave a like and comment with your own thoughts. Like, is EU4 going too far with DLC? Do they need to take a step back, or do you think it's fine? Do you think that, like, do you think Mandate of Heaven is the greatest thing ever, and like it's fine that they're releasing a DLC like 2 months later? Let me know in the comments. And of course, you know, and I hate to do this, but you know, if you want to support the channel, of course be sure to like and subscribe. And if you would, please consider supporting me on Patreon as well. YouTube ad revenue has been declining, and having, you know, Patreon is basically a way to ensure that I continue making these videos. So, thanks everyone for watching, and Godspeed until the next one.